Being a good chess player is about more than just knowing how the pieces move and sacrificing rooks and queens left and right. It's all about strategic playing, memorizing positions, patterns, and knowing how to act and what the best move is to play at the time. The first step in doing that is learning your openings. Learning and memorizing openings will instantly make you 10 times better at chess because it always sets you up perfectly on the board, whether it's for the attack, the defense, or any other tactic you might be thinking of. Master your openings and the rest becomes so much easier. So in this video, I brought you 10 of the best openings that every single chess player should know. Now note, this video won't be going in too deep into the strategy of each opening. It will be just as a base information that can help you get to know those openings and start your journey towards learning them more thoroughly. We will have 5 for white and 5 for black. So without further introductions, let's start with white. At number 5, we have the London opening. You probably heard of it by now. It is a great opening that people online seem to hate for some reason. But a great opening remains a great opening regardless of the hate. The London opening starts with d4, d5, knight f3, knight f6, and then bishop to f4. This is also called the London system, because it is a system more than an opening. This means you don't need to mind too much about the order of the moves, but what's important is the squares the pieces will be placed at by the end of it. This creates a balanced position on the board with a slight advantage for white, and it's a very neutral opening, being good defensively and offensively. It's a great opening for beginners, but also world champion Magnus Carlsen was seen playing it quite a few times. So if you choose to disregard the online hate, this is a great opening to start with. At number 4, we have the King's Indian attack, or Kia for short. This opening was famously played by the legendary Bobby Fischer, and even Hikaru Nakamura used it for 683 games according to chess.com, because it is very versatile and can counter a lot of black's openings like the Sicilian, French, or the Kukan. Much like the London system, this opening doesn't really rely on the order of the moves, but rather the entire position of the pieces by the time the opening ends. You can start with knight f3 or e4, and you will almost always be able to comfortably get to your desired position without much threat from black. But your position will look like this after you're done with the opening, and it gives you a lot of versatility for attack. Depending on how your player is reacting, you will definitely have a lot of fun with this opening. Number 3, we have the Italian game. The Italian game is one of the oldest openings in chess and has been around for centuries, which makes it a classic. Even though it's a common opening for beginners, there are a lot of world-class players that use this opening quite often and always have it in their arsenal, like Wesley So, Levin Aronian, and Hikaru Nakamura, because it creates a good slow positional play opportunity as well as an open tactical game. And personally, I almost always use this opening. It starts with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and then bishop c4. I personally love it because you can also continue it into the fried liver attack, and even if your opponent counters, you will still be in a much better position. Now moving on to the final 2 openings for white that I think everyone should know before moving on to black, and at number 10, we have the Scotch Game. This is also a very good beginner opening that everyone should know, and even Garry Kasparov himself used to play it a lot and made it into a really nice opening for white that he often used to call his secret weapon. The opening starts with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and instead of going for an Italian with a bishop to c4, white can play d4, thus going for the Scotch and gaining a strong control on the center. No matter what black does here, white will almost always have space advantage and a strong position in the center that gives him a strong edge against black. Although it releases and opens up the center very early in the game, it's still a great opening that everyone should learn and experiment with, because there are a lot of ways white can continue after this, so have fun with it. Now the final opening for white that I think everyone should know is the famous Queen's Gambit. No, this is not just a Netflix series. It's also a really good and famous opening for white, consisting of 3 moves. It's actually one of the most famous chess openings ever, with 1 in 8 games opening with it. The 3 moves are d4, d5, and then c4. White here gives up the c-pawn in order to gain more control over the center, and the ability to put more pressure on the opponent early on in the game. Although this is called a gambit, and white has to give up a pawn in order to play it, but white can easily recapture the pawn later in the game, if you played your moves right. In this position, black can either decline or accept the gambit, and each iteration has its play. If black accepts the gambit, the most common move is knight to c3, then developing your other pieces normally and recapturing the pawn with your light squared bishop. Black, however, can also decline the gambit and chooses to defend his pawn with e6, which is the second most played black move in this position, or even c6. This is a really good strategical opening that every player should at least experiment with and try to play a few games with to see how it plays out. And who knows, you could be the next Queen's Gambit opening genius. Now in chess, you won't always be playing with white. There are games where you will have to be the black pieces, and there are also openings that you should know. In black's case, however, it's a little different, because they have to react to what white plays instead of choosing their own openings. But a lot of times, however, you will be able to play the opening you want regardless of your opponent. So enough from white, it's time to talk about openings black can play and discuss 5 that everyone should know. Number 5. The Kukan Defense. This is one of the most famous and best openings for black in response to a king's pawn opening. YouTuber Gotham Chess claims that it's the opening that got him to fall back in love with chess and helped him get his international master title. The Kukan begins with e4 c6, with most variations continuing d4 d5. Either one of these is usually considered the starting position for the Kukan. After d4 d5, the most common moves are knight c3, which is the classic and modern variations, knight d2, then e takes on d5, which is the exchange variation, and the e5, which is the advanced variation. With the Kukan defense, you get the clear and principled path to central control, fast development, and the flexibility to counter basically any attack from white from the opening, with plenty of opportunities to start an attack of your own. Although it's similar to the Sicilian and French defense, it is more solid and dynamic than either one of those two chess openings. It often leads to a better pawn structure for black. Now for number 4, we have the Sicilian Defense. This opening is a response to white's e4 move, and it is one of the most popular openings for black as well. Every player should know how to play this. It is an assertive response to e4 that has been used throughout history by the game's best and most brilliant players. This opening, however, is one of the most complicated openings for black, since it includes many variations, and even more ways white can counter and play an anti-Sicilian system. But every variation starts with e4, then c5, opening up the board and entering the messy world of the Sicilian. The goal of c5 from black is that it creates an imbalanced position. Unlike in a symmetrical game, which is created by most openings, here, each side can claim to have a different set of advantages to their opponent, and the game will tip in favor of the player who can show that their advantage is greater. It is basically a fight and the best player wins. Although it is a hard and complicated opening, it is one that every player should at least know and play with. Number 3. The Dutch Defense. Now there are some cases where your opponents will not be playing the common e4 and chooses to play d4 instead. Well, don't panic and forget everything about chess. The Dutch defense is a great opening for just that. Very similar to the Sicilian after e4, the Dutch instantly kicks the game into an imbalanced territory with the move f5 and leads the game into a creative and original battle. Although this leaves your king open, but most players won't be prepared for a move like this, which will give you an advantage if you play the right moves. There are several systems and variations of the Dutch, like the Leningrad Dutch, Stonewall variation, the Killer Dutch, and the Classical Dutch. But generally, black's idea is to castle quickly and decide where to put their bishop before thinking about ways to attack on the king side. Now at number 2, we have the Scandinavian Defense. The Scandinavian Defense is the oldest recorded opening for black in chess. It starts with the move d5 by black and responds to e4 by white, with the plan to immediately challenge for central control. The most common sequence is that white will take your pawn and you will take back with your queen, putting it right in the center of the board. After that, there are a number of ways you can continue with your sequence, and if done right, you're left with a lot of attacking possibilities to destroy your opponent with. And finally at number 1, we have the Petro Defense. This opening was named after Russian chess player Alexander Petrov, who analyzed this opening extensively in the 19th century. The idea behind the Petro Defense is to immediately attack white's c4 pawn with the black knight, creating a counter threat and forcing white to respond. Although often considered a drawish opening, in the last several years, players like Grandmaster Fabiano Caruana have proven that it's a very solid opening, and that if done well, can be a great success for black. The opening begins with the moves e4, e5, knight f3, then knight f6. Now the pros of this opening is that it allows black to develop quickly and creates a solid defensive structure, but it also gives white a lot of drawish options and leads to a slower, more symmetrical and strategical game. It is, however, a very good opening that every chess player should know when playing with black. Now remember, chess openings are just that, they are openings. Mastering them is very important, but you should also work on your overall skills in order to continue on in the middle game and the end game. But this is the first step.